are you? What do you want?
We want to give you peace.
Outlander! We have your woman!
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Bears Presents The Bear Cave of Terror. I'm your hairy, heavy homo and horror fan host, Steve Morey. Each week, here in the Bear Cave, I invite a horror-loving guest who brings with them one of their favorite scary movies. It can be classic, gory, trashy, obscure, well-known, or something probably still banned in Britain. In other words, a thrilling work of cinematic terror that we think you might enjoy. In each episode, we'll dig into the flesh and bone of the film, highlighting our favorite scary moments, as well as stories and details from beyond the screen, all while our guest imparts their deep and possibly concerning love for this week's frightful vision unto you, our dear listener. And with me in the Bear Cave today is Mr. Ken Creamer. Ken, welcome to the Bear Cave.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me. So I'll tell a little bit about myself. My name is Ken, and I run the 60 Seconds of Steven TikTok account. I also post on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, everything but X. I am a huge Stephen King fan. I have a massive collection. I've been collecting for about 36 years. Read my first Stephen King book, Firestarter, when I was 12, and I've been an addict ever since. I have about 34 books in my collection. Don't just collect the hardcovers and paperbacks. I collect foreign edition, large print, you name it. If there's a different version of I collect it. And today I am bringing one of my favorite, not necessarily the scariest, but it's got some of the best lines, I think, from it. And it's fun to watch. Children of the Corn from 1984.
Children of the Corn. This is one of those movies that I, remember seeing back when I was probably 11 or 12. I had, read some Stephen King up to that point. I'd read It and Carrie and had seen Carrie and a couple other movies here and there. Stand By Me is kind of like one of my longtime favorites, but obviously very different type of film and very different type of King work. But this adaptation kind of stuck in my mind, for a long time. Not because it was what I felt was like the best movie, but it just has such a great concept. It has such like a hook to it. And, I did read the original short story that it was based on. Obviously, there's some differences, and we'll talk about that. But, just the concept of it really has kind of stuck with me for the past 30-some years. When King wrote it in the 70s, looking at the recent history of the flower children cults and like the really crazy, uber religious evangelical cults and the, and those movements in the 70s and the 80s and stuff. Manson Family, People's Temple with Jim Jones and all that. But yeah, and it's still relevant today because, cults don't go away. So this movie, for those of you who haven't seen it before, or it's been a long time, it concerns itself with a couple, Bert and Vicky, who are traveling cross country on their way to Seattle. Bert is going to start his medical residency. Vicky is along for the ride and kind of questioning their relationship at the same time because it seems Bert has a little bit of a fear of commitment. Meanwhile, though, in the town of Gatlin, Nebraska, all of the children in the town have essentially killed all of the adults, and for the past several years have been running it as a bizarre corn-worshipping cult of semi-Amish living, taking care of any kind of adults that have wandered, unfortunately, into the town, and also sacrificing anybody at the age of 19, so including the children as they grow up. And there are two young children who aren't really part of the cult, don't really like the whole thing, including a young girl named Sarah, who is also a bit of a prophet and can kind of see the future. And of course, the couple, through a tragic event, end up in the town and become captured by the very malicious and determined cult of children headed by Isaac, the weird young preacher, and Malachi, his right-hand man / enforcer, who do all the things that they do in service of he who walks behind the rose. And the couple kind of have to figure out a way to survive before being sacrificed to the god that these children worship. So I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah, I think that gives a pretty good basic understanding of the situation.
One thing that we kind of want to look at is the fact that this version of Children of the Corn is adapted from the Stephen King story. So it's not an exact adaptation, more like an interpretation maybe, because it does change some major things. And I think, you probably know a little bit more about the short story, where it first appeared and, what kind of the major differences are between that and the movie.
Yeah, and it appeared in the collection Night Shift. Before that, I believe it was published in a Penthouse magazine. A lot of his earlier stories were. But the really kind of cool thing about Children of the Corn is between the story as it was written and the way the movie did it. And I kind of liked the way they did it. Even though King himself is not a fan of it, there's more of a supernatural element to the movie than there is to the story itself. And in the story, the couple do not think they're not a good couple. They're really not. In the movie, they're a little bit more hopeful and a little bit more loving. And I think that I kind of like that difference between the movie and the story itself. I kind of like a little bit of the hopefulness in my horror, because that could be taken away at any time, and that makes it even more horrific if that happens.
And I think one of the other things, too, that's different between the book and the original story, because King actually, didn't he wrote a screenplay and tried shopping it around, and that did not go well.
Yeah, so originally he was going to write the screenplay for this movie, but like the first 30 pages of it were literally the couple in the car having an argument over the radio. And like they're like, no, you can't do that in a movie, because he'd never really done a screenplay before so much. And so they brought in George Goldsmith to do it, and he's like, no, it's visual. You have to show it, so you don't have to describe everything. You're showing it, and so you don't need to do it that way. And so he rewrote it, and it's actually him who added a little bit more of the supernatural element to it, because King's version was a little bit more all over the place. It was like little clips and vignettes that were going to tell the whole story, kind of like the book. But in George's, it was more linear, straight, more the typical horror type movie. And I think, to be honest, it works for this movie. I don't think it would have been as successful if they had tried to use King's own screenplay in that case.
Oh, yeah. And, talking about hopeful, in the story, we don't necessarily know what happens to Vicky in the short story. She gets taken and then disappears and presumably dies. But we definitely know what happens to Bert. Like, Bert gets crucified and killed in service of the cult. And that's pretty much how it all ends. Like,
all the 18, 19-year-olds are going to keep going. And yeah.
Yep. In the book, like, the kids, there's no dissenters really, other than the one boy that we see who tries to escape and gets, murdered.
And I think you said you had read the story more recently. I haven't read it for a while, but when we did the rewatch for this, I caught that they make it a line about how Sarah and her brother weren't in the corn the day that Isaac delivered the message. And so whatever kind of supernatural influence or whatever happened, they were the only two who weren't in the corn when it happened.
No, in the story, they didn't exist.
And I never even, that's right, because it was the more supernatural thing. I just picked it up for the first time watching this. I'm like, I never caught that before.
George Goldsmith wanted these kids to kind of act a little bit as, outsiders, so that they could they could be some way for the viewer to kind of look in, but not be totally engulfed in the cult. Like they're tolerated, but they're not part of this other group of murderous children. So you can have some sympathy for them.
Which is why he's also the narrator at the beginning of the movie. Where
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Telling the story about like, oh my God, we were, all the kids killed my dad and everything. And they're kind of like rebels too, because they listen to records and play Monopoly, and that's not allowed. Sarah has the gift of sight and she draws pictures with crayons, which again is not allowed.
With Sarah, I was trying to find if they ever reference it directly, if she had the shine. They don't specifically call it the shine, but it matches up with how the shine works in a lot of his other work. So I'm going to consider her as having the shine.
Yeah, which is interesting that she is an invention for this movie, but the fact that she fits in with the world of Stephen King that we had seen up to that point in films and in his books kind of ties it, I think, a little bit better.
I like the way it works.
Yeah, and of course, at the end of this movie, both Bert and Vicky make it out alive, and they bring the kids with them. It's like, hey, kids, how about you come and live with us for, a week or a month or whatever? Like, we'll just randomly adopt 2 children whose parents have been murdered and head off to Seattle. But it's the 80s, and they could probably do that with...
It was the 80s. Parents needed a commercial to remember that they even had kids. So, I mean... And it's not like the parents are going to come looking. Now I know we had talked when we talked about doing this. I had mentioned, did you catch the book in the car on the dashboard?
Yes, that was so cool. Like it is nice. I love when movies could be that self-referential by having like the copy of Night Shift right there on the dashboard while Bert and Vicky are driving. It's like that's a little nice wink, to make it a little bit more hopeful. And George Goldsmith, I was reading a nice interview with him from I believe it was a book called "It Came from the '80s," where he comes right out and says, I'm surprised that not everybody realized that my script for this is a metaphor for the Iranian hostage crisis, and Gatlin is Iran, and Malachi is the Ayatollah, and Bert and Vicky are the American public, and the blue man who gets killed, he was actually the CIA, and it's all one big metaphor for how people can be manipulated to rise up and create a sort of autocratic or theocratic society that tortures and torments people. And, it's like, oh, okay.
Who knew a horror movie could be so deep and such a, take on a religious extremism?
Yes. But it kind of fits. These kids were primed by where they lived in the Bible Belt, constantly hearing, all this fire and brimstone evangelical kind of message, that it was super easy for them to slide into some other extreme form of belief.
Which I like the way they set that up in the car when they were setting with the radio, and suddenly you get all the preacher talking and the fire and brimstone, and that just kind of, so you know where you are. And I'm from Nebraska, so there are places like that. So another thing that I thought was kind of cool in this as a Stephen King fan, they mentioned Hemingford, I believe is where they were looking for it. Now in The Stand, Mother Abigail lives in Hemingford home. And then in it, I want to say, is it Ben Haskam, I believe, has a house in Hemingford home as well. So I don't know if it's supposed to be the same place, but they're all supposed to be in Nebraska. So I thought that was a neat little, it ties into the other stories as well.
That is kind of cool. I like it, with Stephen King, of course, in all of his books, he kind of has these little Easter eggs, I guess you could call them, but just connecting it to the greater Stephen King universe that he's been writing for the past 50 years.
He was building a multiverse before Marvel even thought of it.
Exactly. Just read the Dark Tower series. It's all in there, kids.
Oh, yeah, it is.
So one of the interesting things about this movie, of course, is the corn. It is the most interesting thing. The corn is everywhere. Corn.
The car,
everybody's got like little corn dolls and corn crucifixes, and their weapons are corn, and they like the whole town's entire industry is built around gasohol or what's now known as ethanol. even though they're not allowed to operate machinery, which I thought was really interesting. Like they're super, anti-tech, anti-everything, and yet they're producing tons of ethanol.
Reasons.
It's all good. They got to have something. They got to set up that Deus Ex Machina at the end with, how they destroy the demon. But I think that all this corn kind of posed a bit of a challenge when they were filming this.
A little bit.
So, and you were talking about how the director of this, who was Fritz Kirsch, was not the original director.
Sam Raimi was up for the role of director in this one, but he wanted more time to be able to do it correctly. But they were kind of in a bit of a time crunch because of, it was corn and it was harvest season. You got to get it before it starts turning brown. And so because he couldn't do it in the timetable they wanted, they passed on him. And then I believe they went to somebody else, but I don't remember who. And then I believe Fritz was the third person they went to, said he could do it.
Yep. And they filmed it all in Iowa, in like several parts of Iowa, and they kept having to kind of move around the production because they needed to get the corn at like the perfect time before it got ready for harvest, but it had to be a certain height and, had to be perfect. So good old Iowa, I guess, is close enough to Nebraska.
It was pretty close. I actually used to work with a friend of mine who part of the farm that her family owned, it's a farm in her family, was used to film part of the movie.
Oh,
And
wow.
she was going to get me a little jar of dirt from it so I could say I literally had some dirt from the set of Children of the Corn. But that never actually wound up working out because I went into a new position at a different company. So, but neat story to tell still.
Yeah. With having to do this, having to kind of rush through the filming, I think they did all the exterior shots in like 23 days. So they saved all the indoor scenes for when, they were done with the corn so that they could get everything before it all turned bad. And I think you were saying that like at some points they may have been painting the corn green just
Yeah,
to,
they painting them green and having them propped up in order to do it.
Yeah. Oof. But I mean, it is such a huge part of this movie. It really sets the environment. Like it's desolate that you could go for miles and miles and not see another house. There's a part where they get stuck driving down a dirt road and it just basically turns into cornrows. And they can't find their way out. There's a little bit of panic that happens that sets in because all you see is the corn and the sound and everything about it just kind of closes you in and cuts you off from civilization.
No panic or anything.
But I think that is it is interesting talking about these isolated farm communities and that this kind of thing could happen and nobody outside Gatlin realizes it or knows anything or cares that there's something that killed everybody in the town. Like nobody's paid taxes there for several years and apparently nothing matters.
Well, and this might be a good time to talk about Disciples of the Crow because I wanted to actually touch on that. So in Disciples of the Crow, which is on YouTube if anyone wants to see it, but was made in 1983, a year before Children of the Corn, but it is basically the story of Children of the Corn, only it takes place in Oklahoma, and it actually follows the story a little bit more. Bert and Vicky are jerks to each other, and at the end, he says a line in there that I just thought was so chilling, and it just kind of explained why nobody notices, and he's like, maybe nobody notices is because their God approves of it. And I'm like, what a concept that, that's why they can get away with it. That's why nobody is noticing this town with no one paying taxes and no county sheriffs going through and no family calling from because their God approves of it. And I'm like, that's just kind of a chilling thought.
Some supernatural like bubble. They're cut off in more ways than just the human natural way. They're literally cut off from the rest of the world. There's one part where they're trying to get away from Gatlin. They're trying to go to Hemingford. And no matter which way they go, they always end up closer to Gatlin. And even trying to get away from it, that's where they end up in the middle of a cornfield. Like there's just no way out. And possibly it's because, their God just keeps forcing them unnaturally to keep going.
That makes it even almost scarier to think that, once you're within a certain radius of Gatlin, you're in the snare and you can't escape no matter what. And the way they had that the old guy at the gas station who was kind of their outer world contact person, but they didn't need him too much, I guess. But I just kind of like the concept of, imagine like what torturous his life was, knowing that he's basically on borrowed time and that he can be killed at any time by this psycho cult that kills adults.
Kind of like maybe he was also trapped in a way there, like he couldn't leave. It's just him and his dog, and he can't go any further. They use him for, repairs and for oil and, whatever, like some kind of supplies of some sort. How he's getting them, I'm not sure. Maybe he does. Maybe he can get deliveries. I don't know. But it just seems like he's kind of trapped there. And when he's murdered, you kind of get the feeling like this was coming for sure. Like he knew it. And it's just sad that the dog had to bite it first.
Right? I mean,
poor bandit.
You deserve that. You killed my dog.
You killed my dog. You kids. Yeah. I know you little bastards.
You didn't have to kill my dog. I mean, kids are just kind of scary in general. I mean, in horror movies, for most of them. So this is just kind of opposite of notch. In this case, kids are not just scary; they're murderous monsters.
Yeah, and let's talk about Isaac and Malachi. There's something that Job, the narrator boy, says at one point, that the parents never saw anything wrong. They actually thought that he was like a really good preacher or something, and they encouraged it. And they encouraged like him sort of proselytizing to the other children, because they thought, oh, well, yeah, we have religion. We want the kids to know religion too. And so here's one of their own who's teaching them. But it's like, well, he's kind of preaching something else. Maybe if they had, noticed a little bit sooner, it wouldn't have happened. But, and then Malachi is just like angry, hormonal and violent and, super murderous.
Malachi's my favorite. I just think that he was great in that movie. I mean, just I don't know how many times like I've confused my friends by just being like, Outlander, we have your woman.
I say that too often in my life. I don't know why, but things will bring it out of me. And it's a mix between that and that wonderful South Park episode from 15, 20 years ago, where they parodied this whole thing. All the adults were sent to prison and all the kids were running this town, and Cartman had that role, that Outlander, we have your woman, like was screaming that randomly.
I have not seen that episode, but I'm going to make a note of that so I can go find it. Whenever I watch any other media, television, movie, whatever, there's two games I like to play. Where's Steven, where I'm always looking in the background on coffee tables, bookcases, whatever, looking for, or somebody reading a copy of a Stephen King book. And there's so many of those out there. Or when they make a reference to any sort of Stephen King work, whether it's, a reference to the twins from The Shining or, the Children of the Corn in South Park. And John hates it because every time we're watching something, I'm like, that's a Stephen King reference. And he'll be like, yes, I get it. Shut up.
Well, and speaking of Stephen King, like himself, I know that this is just an adaptation of his work, and he was kind of not happy with the fact that, one, they took away the script from him, and two, that he didn't really have much say in the making of this movie at all. But the early 80s were just saturated with Stephen King adaptations. I mean, 1983, what was it? There were like 3 movies that were released in 83.
One thing like Christine,
Cujo, Dead Zone.
Dead Zone, yeah, they were like all came out like fairly quickly.
And then here in 1984, now you've got another Stephen King one.
There was Firestarter, then there was like Cat's Eye, and then Creepshow. And the 80s were massive for Stephen King movies. The 90s were more of his miniseries time frame. Miniseries and big theatrical movies was more of the 90s.
Absolutely. But you did still have like, let's see, Stand By Me was in 86. Silver Bullet was in 85. Yeah. Maximum Overdrive was 1986, the one that he actually wrote. And let's see, 87 had both Running Man, although at that time I don't think anybody knew that was technically Stephen King yet.
Yeah, but no.
Um,
But actually, funny story about that. Originally, it wasn't going to be a Stephen King thing, but while it was being made, they found out his Richard Bachman alias, and so that's why they're like, just run with it.
that was because that's super, when was it where like all of the Bachman stuff kind of came out as Stephen King? Was that 87, 88?
It was like, I want to say like 85, I actually think it was,
Okay.
because he only got a couple of books out on it. Misery was actually going to be under Richard Bachman, but his identity was revealed ahead of time as well there. So that's why it came out as Stephen King. I love the reason he did writing as Richard Bachman was the fact that somebody told him, hey, the only reason your books sell is because they have your name on them, because by Stephen King. And so he wanted to prove them wrong, as well as smart business move. Publishers at the time only liked to release like 2 books a year because they didn't want to oversaturate the market by releasing too many books under the same author. So by doing that, he was able to release double the amount of books in a year. And obviously, he likes to write, so he had plenty to say. And so that was a way to kind of get around the rule of not writing too many books in a year.
Well, it worked out. And of course, here in 2025, we've got a Richard Bachman adaptation that's coming out this year, The Long Walk.
Running Man is being remade as well.
Oh, that's right. The Running Man as well. It's being remade. You kind of talk about Stephen King as this cultural phenomenon, and he really is. Whether you like him as an author or like his work, you can't deny the effect that he has on 50 years of film and TV.
My philosophy when it comes to King's work is if you're not a fan of King, you just haven't found the right King product yet. Because he does everything. He's got fantasy, he's got horror, he's got sci-fi, he's got drama, he's got crime, he's got love stories. I mean, he's got something for everyone. There's an incident where like he got into apparently a conversation with an older woman at a grocery store and she didn't like the fact he does all those horror things. And she made a comment about why can't you do, like the Shawshank Redemption or something. And he's like, that's me. I did that. And she's like, no, you didn't. And she didn't believe that he wrote that because she just thought he did horror. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize The Green Mile, The Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me, like those aren't horror movies. Those are good drama, emotional tearjerker movies. I mean, I can't watch The Green Mile without a box of Kleenex every time, no matter what.
Well, and also earlier this year, another Stephen King work, The Life of Chuck, came out, and that was probably one of my favorite movies of this year. It was just absolutely gorgeous. It was emotional, not horror. There was a supernatural element towards it, towards the end. There were some supernatural elements to it, but generally it was an extremely emotional, dramatic film that allowed you to adopt a perspective that wasn't so much fantasy, but hope and an interesting way of looking at what life means.
And it's been such a massive couple of years since probably 2017 when they did the first remake, It and then It 2. Then it's been like Life of Chuck, The Monkey, all the Stephen King TV adaptations.
Yeah. That's, it is just kind of amazing, where it's almost a given that there's another one coming at some point, or 5 in a single year. Well, also there's the Stephen King adaptation on TV, The Institute.
Oh yeah, The Institute. Welcome to Derry, which sort of King related, King adjacent. There's also going to be a Carrie series that's coming out. There's a Dark Tower series in the works. I heard there may be a Talisman adaptation, possibly. Because now with streaming and there's so many different services, it's like every service can have their own King adaptation because they're all on different services. So I think it's just right now is a good time for him because so many people are interested in his work and there's so many studios that want to produce it.
When you kind of look back at like his first decade of movies, which this is part of, because I think Carrie came out in 1976. So within, from 1976 to like 1985, 86, there were a lot of movies of his that were made from all of his big original books. So the only one that wasn't, that didn't come out in that time period that people were really expecting to was The Stand, which eventually, they switched it from being a film and just made it into a miniseries. That was part of what you mentioned. It was part of that ABC
The golden age
relationship
series. Yep.
Yeah, because they had like every year there's a new one. You had It, which was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
The Stand, Tommy Knockers. Was the Langoliers one of theirs?
Langoliers, Rose Red, Storm of the
Hmm.
Century.
Yeah.
There was another movie called Golden Years, but Golden Years actually was, I want to say, CBS, and that's kind of why it was its own thing. He had issues with CBS because of Golden Years, because it was actually supposed to become a series, and so it was supposed to end with a to be continued, but they made him do a different ending, and he was not happy about that because it never manifested. So that's kind of why he and went to ABC, and that's when the golden era started.
The golden era instead of the golden years. So you have like the different eras of his work because he's evolved as an author, but also films have evolved. And, what makes a good film, what constitutes a good adaptation has changed so much. So like in the 70s and 80s, they were adapting a lot of his horror movies. And then starting the mid 80s and going into the 90s, they started adapting his more dramatic features, his more dramatic work that was not as supernatural, but still had a massive human impact. And Children of the Corn is one of many, but it is one that I think has a very interesting legacy. Of all the other Stephen King movies, I think this one has probably the most sequels.
I believe it does with, I think, there are 9 technical sequels to this one, but then there are also 2 attempts at rebooting it. One in 2000 and I want to say 9 and 2020. Yeah, I actually don't know if I have the one from 2009, but I don't know if I've ever actually watched it, and I didn't even realize there was one from 2020. So yeah. As for the sequels from the original, the second one isn't so bad, but after that, they just go way downhill.
I mean, somebody's got to be watching and enjoying them. Otherwise, they would have probably stopped making sequels. But
When I want to say the actor who plays Isaac, he is the only one I think who appears in all 9 of the actual sequels. So he appears in the original and then all the sequels after, but not the reboots. Well, then I vaguely remember one of them tries to give it like a scientific explanation. Like it turns out it was ergot poisoning, like what they think might have happened in Salem, the fungus that grows on corn and makes people hallucinate. So they were trying to give that a reasonable explanation for why all the kids went crazy and killed their family. And I'm just like, don't science it, at this point in time, just let it go.
Yeah, just let it go. And actually, speaking of like the cause of this, like we had already talked about, the Goldsmith version of Children of the Corn, he who walks behind the rose is actually a being that exists and is not humanoid. And they made that choice on purpose. They were like, show the monster, what's he going to look like? Some guy in a rubber suit or whatnot. They didn't have like this huge budget for special effects. So it's like, well, we can make him look like some goofy dude in a suit or with claws or something. Or we could try to do something a little bit more conceptual. And I guess depending on how you feel about the execution of that, they either were successful or less successful. I was reading an article that was written about this in, I think it was the New York Times when the film came out, where the quote from the reviewer is, "When we finally do see he who walks behind the rose, it turns out to be he who burrows between the rows like a gopher. And gophers, even satanic ones, aren't terribly intimidating."
See, now I do kind of disagree with that because, to be honest, based off of the time frame and the technology and the limitations they had to work with, I thought that was kind of scary. Not being able to see it and just suddenly the ground starts chasing you. That's kind of scary. I mean, Tremors was very scary for that exact reason.
Tremors, Screamers, which came a lot later, like those 2 movies had the exact same type of effect of like this mound of dirt, something digging and burrowing under the ground, just out of sight and running towards you as fast as
And the
possible.
thing is, you don't know what it is. That's what makes it scary. All you know is there's something moving, a lot of dirt heading your way. Does it have tentacles? Is it just a gaping maw that's going to open underneath you? Is it going to reach out and grab you with claws? You don't know.
Yep. And I think that to me, that was probably the most, I would say like the real scary moment in this is very much towards the end, where he who walks behind the rose has been enraged. They've tried to crucify Isaac, and he's very unhappy about that. And he sort of resurrects Isaac as this demonic creature. And in the meantime, Peter Horton, who plays Bert, and Linda Hamilton, who plays Vicky, they've taken most of the kids away to the barn, where they're trying to stay safe. But Bert sees there might be a way to get rid of this, or to finish the situation, to save ourselves. And so he's gonna take the ethanol and spray it over the corn and set it all on fire, hopefully killing the demon. And there's a part where they've sprayed ethanol over all the rows of corn, and now there's a Molotov cocktail that he's had Job make for him, and he lights it and he throws it really far, but like in the middle of the dirt, so it's nowhere near the corn. And Job decides to run for it, to go and pick it up and bring it back, so that he can rethrow it. And I don't know how far, like that's why it felt like he must have thrown it so far, because Job runs out there, and then here comes the Mount coming after him, and he's running as fast as he can with this flaming bottle, trying to get back to where Bert is. And it's just like, how far is he? How close is he? My God, like this thing is right on him. It's going to like completely suck him under the ground. And he makes it just in time, of course. And then they can throw the bottle and set everything ablaze. That was like the truly scary moment in this. Special mention, obviously, to the opening scene.
Yep, that's the scene that always got me when I was younger, was that one at the beginning. And they did such a good job, the kids sitting there, and just a splash of blood, and they didn't have to get super gory to still portray what was happening and do it in a scary way. Although the scene you were just talking about, one thing that cracked me up and I busted out laughing was when Isaac was on the cross and he just goes shooting straight up into the air. And then when he comes back, he looks like he's just been basically dunked in a sack of flour. He's just kind of all covered in white and powdery. And I kind of just chuckled at that so hard. I mean, when I was a kid, that might have been scary, but when I rewatched it, I was like, this is kind of ridiculous.
Like, well, it might have been cornstarch.
There you go. There you go.
His
Perfect.
hair was sticking up after that, and it's really good. I did appreciate how sadistic these kids were. They really did play creepy. The dialogue was a little stilted, especially Isaac's dialogue. Just because they tried to make it seem like extra, biblical and, very preacherish. I think they pulled it off pretty well. You got the feel that these kids had created their own sort of religious cultish society, changing the language to suit, their faith. It's a pretty generally scary situation when you have an entire town that is just devoted to this one controlling ideal, monitored by violence.
The idea of being a parent and your kid turning on you and taking you out, that's just terrifying. I'm not a parent, but as a parent watching this movie, that to me would add to the terror of it, because it's like, what a concept, we gotta hide the knives from little Timmy now.
And that's actually one thing that I also appreciated about Disciples of the Crow, the short film. Jonathan, I think it was Jonathan Woodward who wrote and directed that. He makes the weapons that the kids use to kill the parents all appear to be kind of handmade. So they're made out of like corn cobs and blades stuck into them and things carved on the end. So it feels more ritualistic of a murder, because you're using special tools that you've made for the purpose of unaliving your family members.
So I've got to see if I can find a copy of it if there's any out there that I can get an actual physical copy of it. Because it's only a 18, 19-minute long movie, but it tells the story, and it does it very succinctly and with a limited budget. It doesn't get all flowery. It doesn't have the overly supernatural element to it. Nothing in it is specifically supernatural. Although the woman gets a little weird when she's playing with the knife, and I kind of couldn't tell if that was maybe her being influenced by something or if she was just being a bitch. It was hard to tell.
I
I
mean,
did
it could go either way.
I did actually like the fact the way those two fought, and like, you don't know how to use, don't you know how to read? And they hated each other, and it's like that was just so more towards the story in the book. And I think it probably would have followed Stephen King's screenplay because, like I said, the first 30 pages was them bickering in the car. And that's basically, how this one started out. But I really liked Disciples of the Crow, so I recommended that on my TikTok as well. So hopefully some people check it.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes for this episode too, because when you have and I wouldn't say that it counts as a fan film because obviously it was released before Children of the Corn, so it holds a very interesting place, based on its release. But as sort of a comparison point to the big Hollywood version, it's kind of cool to see how different people interpret the source material, and they're very similar in some aspects, but very different in others, and I think that's really really fascinating.
Well, and I don't know if you're familiar. Have you heard of his Dollar Baby program?
No.
Okay, so that it ended, I want to say, in like 2023 because the person who was running it for him actually passed away. But what he would do is he would sell the rights to his stories for independent filmmakers and student filmmakers to make for $1. The only condition was they couldn't be like, commercially released or like you can't burn DVDs or whatever. You can do it for your project and that's it kind of deal. And there's been several of them done over the years. And there's actually one of them, The Lawnmower Man, but it's actually more accurate to the story of The Lawnmower Man that King wrote, not the crappy movie that came out that he sued to get his name removed from. It's only like 15 minutes, but it's more closer to the story. But yeah, he did like, there's a ton of them, and you can find some of them online. I believe there was a film festival a few years ago where they actually publicly displayed a lot of them for the first time in like years. But I mean, I don't know if this was possibly one of the Dollar Baby programs and that's why it was made and before he got the commercial rights to Hollywood, or if this was something different. But his Dollar Baby program, it was actually a really kind of cool thing for up and coming filmmakers to mess around with and do.
I didn't know about that, and I think that was such a great idea.
It was a really cool program, and you can still find some of them on YouTube if you search Dollar Babies. It's a shame that it ended, but there's it'd be really nice if they would release like maybe a collection of the Dollar Babies that they have. I mean, I think that a lot of collectors would be willing to pay for that.
I agree. I think that's that's a great way to engage young filmmakers for sure, and independent filmmakers. To give them something they can put on their CVs and also cut their teeth on and have it be very solid source material. Who doesn't want to make a movie with the full express approval of Stephen King?
Right. That's one of the reasons that I love Stephen King is he does give back so much to the community. Like him and his wife, I should say both of them because they're both very generous and she's very successful in what she does as well. But yeah, like they gave several $1 million to their local library to expand it. And then like I believe it's either the house next to the house he lived in Bangor because he doesn't actually live there anymore. He now lives in Florida. But like they converted it into like a writer's kind of retreat thing for people to go and write and stuff. And I'm like, he does a lot of stuff like that. He's really big into giving back to the community and big into music and just all the charity work that, and money he donates. So I think that's pretty cool that he does a lot of that stuff for the arts and to promote creativity in young writers and creatives.
And even if he didn't necessarily get to have a lot of say in the making of Children of the Corn, I think that this movie is a major part of his film legacy. It may not be on everybody's top 10 list, but it's definitely a very memorable film. It's got such a great concept to it. And plus it stars Linda Hamilton, who went This came out before Terminator, so she wasn't the big name that she is, that she became. And then Peter Horton was also kind of early in his career, and he went on to be, a major, TV personality through the 90s, so late the 80s and the early 90s, with his chest hair and all. Is there anything else that we can learn about Children of the Corn?
I would love to, frankly, have seen what Sam Raimi would have done with it. There's actually been several movies where other directors have been put up to make them, like a couple where it was supposed to be George Romero, and then he couldn't do it for whatever reason, so somebody else did it. And I believe there's an alternative universe out there where all of these movies have been made by these directors, and I want to see them at some point in time. That would be amazing. Frankly, this movie has a special place in my heart just because there was a period of time in the 80s where, like, if you had cable TV, HBO, I think it was specifically, there were like 3 movies that would play all the time. And it was like Children of the Corn, Firestarter, and The Dead Zone. And that's where part of my love of Stephen King came from, was HBO in the 80s. And so this movie may not be his scariest movie, may not even be the most directly adaptive of his, but it has a special place in my heart just because it was one of the introductions to Stephen King for me.
It's such a good way to look at a movie like this as, it's the part of the introduction or part of the reason why, we go on to expand our love of Stephen King works or horror movies in general, and just, getting the introduction, getting that foot in the door because of a movie like this. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me and bringing this movie to the cave.
Well, I'm very happy to do it. I'm glad you were able to put up with me for a little bit of time while I talk about King, because I know John gets tired of it, so.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, and we will have you on again to talk about some more King goodness. I know you had an idea of one coming up in the future, so we will reveal that at a future date for sure. You've just listened to another episode of The Bear Cave of Terror, and if you haven't seen the 1984 Children of the Corn, or after listening to us are struck with an irresistible compulsion to watch it again, it is streaming for free on Tubi, Shudder, and Plex, and of course it's available digitally on physical media. And Ken, if listeners would like to get in touch with you or like to see more about your facts and trivia on Stephen King, how would they do that?
I'm on TikTok as 60 Seconds of Steven. I'm also on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, also under 60 Seconds of Steven. And so, yeah. And if you want to shoot me an email, 60secondsofsteven@gmail.com. If you have an idea or a question, I'm always looking for ideas to do a new video. So I'm definitely open to suggestions.
And if you would also want to follow the Bear Cave of Terror on Blue Sky and Instagram at Bear Cave of Terror, you may. Or you can also send us an email at bearcaveofterror@gmail.com. I'll provide a list of sources in the show notes if you'd like to learn more about the original Children of the Corn movie, or even have a link to the Disciples of the Crow short film that we talked about tonight. So, good night, everyone. And remember, he who walks behind the rows forbids crayons and record players, but is totally cool with flared jeans and ethanol. Take care.
I think so.
Then why are we still
Just
running?
keep going.